Hi everyone and welcome to my video about the fifth move knight b5 line. I'm not exactly sure what this line is called, so I'm just gonna call it knight b5. I'm sure it does have a name, but I'm not aware of it. Anyway, the move 5 knight b5 is a pretty interesting move. It has a very clear idea of playing knight d6 check, and you should definitely answer this move with d6. I've looked a little bit at knight f6 here as well, but it turns out that after bishop f4, e5, bishop g5, what we have is a very uncomfortable position, as it's a bad version of the Sveshnikov variation. For those of you who are not aware of the Sveshnikov, that's an opening that starts with the following moves. Just to give you a brief explanation of what's going on there. And you can see that this is a very similar position to what I've just shown to you, except that white's knight from b1 is still on, from c3 is still on b1, and black's pawn isn't on d6 yet. But this actually gives white the opportunity to bring back his b5 knight to c3 and develop the other knight on d2, whereas in the Sveshnikov this knight has to return to a3, which is a very clumsy square, and white spends a lot of time getting that knight back into play afterwards. So knight f6 is a mistake that you don't want to make, and after d6 you don't have that problem because you can answer bishop f4 with e5. Nonetheless, bishop f4 is a move that has been tried here. c4 is the main move and has been played especially I guess in the 70s, 80s and some games in the 90s as well, a little bit more. It's not as popular anymore, but it's something that we're going to have a look at. But first of all, I want to check bishop f4 with you because this is something that Peter Liko has played not too long ago, and Peter Liko is always someone that you have to take very seriously in the opening. He's a former World Championship contender and a very well prepared player. So bishop f4 pretty much forces black to play e5. Knight e5 is not a very attractive option here. Doesn't have a very good reputation. So e5, bishop e3, and once again what we can see is a structure that looks a little bit like a Sveshnikov or a Kalashnikov for those who are aware of those Sicilian openings. But it's kind of a good version for black, so it's not something you have to worry about. But once again, I said this several times, if you're a Taimanov player, and specifically if you want to follow my repertoire, you have to be very flexible about the structures that you like to play. It's a little different than playing something like the French, or maybe even being a Ruy Lopez player, where the structures are definitely a little bit more defined. Here, once again, we see something that is completely new to us. But once again, I don't think these lines are so hard to play, so I'm just going to explain you a few ideas, and I think you should be fine. So here I like the move bishop e6. The idea after knight f6 is once again bishop g5, and as I said before, we saw this position with the pawn on d7. This is actually a little bit more interesting, but still I don't like it because the white knights can go back to c3 and the other knight can go to d2, which is just a really big improvement over the normal Sveshnikov, even though it did cost white a full tempo. So bishop e6 is the move that I prefer here, and here white has two serious options. One of them is c4, which is quite thematic. White tries to build up this Maroczy structure once again, which really controls the center very well. But the back the disadvantage of this move is that it leaves a lot of dark squares open for the black pieces, and very often black will try to exchange the dark squared bishops in order to use those squares to his advantage. For example, after bishop e7, knight c3, bishop g5 was already played, and this is the right plan. I have a few interesting lines here that I can show to you. After bishop takes g5, queen takes g5. White can play something like h4, but that just gives black normal play after queen e7, and he can continue with normal development, or what is always an option in these positions. It's not my favorite way to play them, but it's definitely possible, is to try to play f5 early on, which is a bit more dynamic. But I would probably play knight f6 followed by knight d7 and maybe put a knight on d4 in these positions, and I just have the feeling that they're very equalish and you can still outplay your opponent here. Instead of h4, however, there is a very tricky move, knight b5. As you guys might have seen, the pawn on d6 is hanging, but right now it's not really a threat as In fact, probably black will play rook d8 first, and then queen c1 check is going to come in, which is probably leading to a lost position already. So queen takes d6 would be a very big mistake. But knight b5, however, is pretty interesting. And here I'm going to suggest the funny looking move long castle, which is quite an unorthodox position. So this is maybe something that you want to remember when you play this line. However, these moves are pretty natural to my mind. If white doesn't take on d6, he just lost quite a bit of time going back with this knight. So really I think he should take. He can go knight c3, but then after king b8, black has a very comfortable position as he's going to play probably f5 and knight f6, and he's just very active, and well, I think I would prefer to play black in this position. Instead, knight takes d6 is a pretty strong move, or at least a pretty testing move. You should play rook takes d6 here. I think if you remove the king, white can probably support his knight with c5, and he might be a bit better. But rook takes d6 actually leads to interesting complications that are definitely okay for black. So after queen takes d6, queen c1 check. White is pretty much forced to play queen d1. After king e2, well, among others, knight d4 check is going to come in, and it's probably going to lead to a quick mate. Also queen takes b2 would win the rook, so that's just a very bad move. Queen d1, however, is okay. White is not losing any significant amount of material, but black does take on b2, which leads him to have only an exchange down for quite active play, as you can see. After knight d2, we go knight b4. Knight d4 is also an option, which probably goes into the same thing. After rook b1. After rook c1 here, you can simply play knight f6 and continue your attacking chances with rook d8 coming in, and black is actually a bit better. Anyway, rook b1, knight c2 check, king e2, and here you can already force a draw by knight d4 check, king e1, knight c2 check. However, I wouldn't do that. I would take on a2 and continue the game here, as I think that black has really nice compensation. So really this line is not something that probably you'll face because it's very dangerous for white, but it's still nice to see what kind of potential there is in the black position if white tries to sort of punish you for making that early bishop e7, bishop g5 maneuver. So let's go back to the position over here. Another move is to play knight 1c3, which is a little bit more in the style of the Sveshnikov. Here I suggest you play a6, knight a3, and knight f6. Now we get into some kind of strange version of the Sveshnikov where white has put the bishop on e3, which he sometimes has to put back on g5. However, this is a little bit more tricky than I thought it would be, but I do think black is doing fine, although it really resembles Kalashnikov defense, but yet again I think it's a good version of it. So here knight c4 will be the logical move. The reason I believe that I don't want to play b5 here is because knight d5 would be played, and I'm not such a big fan of playing moves such as knight f6 when probably black is forced to take back with the g-pawn in some positions. That is really a little bit too much of a Sveshnikov style, and I don't think that suits me, and I think that's also a bit much to ask from you guys when you want to play the Taimanov. So I think the move knight f6 is a little bit more reasonable, as black keeps a more normal structure. After knight c4, b5, knight b6, rook b8, white has made a lot of moves and he finally managed to get his knights into decent position, but it has taken so much time that by now black can afford to make some annoying moves like knight g4 here, and I think actually this leads to a very decent position. For example, if white first of all, if white lets you take on e3, that gives you a very decent position, as the rook is already quite well placed in order to face moves such as a4, which is usually annoying move in the Sveshnikov, and also bishop e7, bishop g5 is another maneuver that's going to give you some decent play there, as the pressure on the d6 pawn is very small. Bishop d2 here is another move, but after b4, knight a4, knight f6, bishop g5, bishop e7, bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, we get into some sort of Sveshnikov position, but once again a very decent one. Black can follow up with a5 and short castle here, and once again put the bishop on g5. This knight's a little bit out of play, and even though this might not be the most familiar position to you, I think you should have no trouble playing this. It's really just a very decent version of a Sveshnikov. That's all I can say. So let's go to the main line, which is c4. And this is a bit more, this is once again a little bit different, because here we're not going to see any pawn going to e5. In fact, what white's trying to do is get us into some sort of a hedgehog system where we put our pawns on a6, b6, and usually our knight back to d7. I think most people are familiar with the term hedgehog, but that's sort of the setup that black chooses. And it's not necessarily something that I like to play very much, because it's sort of a strategy where you have to wait quite a lot, and sometimes you want to make a counter-attacking move, but the position is not quite ready because white has to advance first. So I found a pretty decent setup where at least I'm getting positions that look like a hedgehog, but a little bit in favor of the normal one, or just a little different, so a bit more interesting to me. Black should continue with knight f6 in order to provoke knight c3, and only then kick back this knight from b5, knight a3. So as you can see, white did manage to put these pawns nicely in a Maroczy structure, but it took him a lot of, he had to make quite a sacrifice, spending 2 tempi on that, and at the same time his knight is now misplaced on a3 for the coming moves. Here I would suggest you play the normal move bishop e7. So for those who are hedgehog fans, you can play b6, bishop b7, followed by knight e5 and knight d7 here, but as I said before, that's not something that I really fancy. Bishop e7, bishop e2, short castle, b6. I'm planning to still use this knight on c6 for the time being. Bishop e3, bishop b7, and this is actually sort of the critical position of this line, which was discussed quite a bit in, for example, Anatoly Karpov's games, who likes to play these structures as white, where he has quite a bit of space, and he, if he gets his, especially his knight on a3 back into the game, he's very good at outplaying people from these positions. However, the move he used to always play was the move queen b3. Before going to that, I just want to quickly show you some other moves. Queen d2 is a move here, but after knight e5, f3, d5, black pretty much equalizes on the spot. You can have a look at that in the ebook, so that's not something to worry about. As I said, because of this loss of time and misplaced knight, white cannot just afford to make all the normal moves such as queen d2, rook d1, rook c1. He will try to, but he really has to watch out for this d5 break. And that's one of the main reasons why I wouldn't put my knight to d7 too early. So instead of queen d2, there is also rook c1. After this, knight e5 is yet again a good move, trying to provoke this f3 move and opening up the bishop. Here queen d4 is the only normal way I found for white to sort of hold things together. f4 is not a very good move, and this is quite a nice maneuver to remember. Here knight g6 is a very strong move. The point being that after bishop f3, knight h4, the bishop is going to be lost inevitably, and this will leave black with a very pleasant position and a slight advantage. We also have queen d3 here, and this is a pawn sacrifice that you might want to remember here. e5 is actually also part of the point why knight g6 is such a strong move. After f5, knight f4, takes, knight d7. Once again, white's pieces are a little bit scattered around, and I think black enjoys really nice compensation as he's planning to play something like rook e8, bishop f6, knight c5, and put a lot of pressure on this e-pawn. So I really like this position for black, and it's something that should cause you no troubles. So after queen d4 here, rook c8, I think f3 is once again the move. If f4, there's now knight g4, so f3. Now it's time to go knight d7 in order to prepare d5 once again, and this is just a very tricky position for white, as all these ideas with bishop c5 come into play and so on. And just to give you a sample line, Actually here rook e8 seems like a good move to me, and you can have a look at the ebook where I suggest a line where I think after knight c2 black goes d5 and eventually just blockades that sacrificed pawn but gets a very interesting compensation for that. So have a look at that. Those are all very dynamic positions that if you want to play for a win you should probably really enjoy. And I think they're a bit harder for white to play than for black objectively. So let's go to the main move, which is queen b3. And here I have actually found a move that I'm quite proud of. I don't remember exactly when I found it. I think it must have been last year or 2013. But the general tendency in this position is that over the past decades people have been playing knight d7 here automatically, just protecting the b pawn, and that sort of leads to quite a tense struggle as the knight on d7 is a bit misplaced. Once again, that doesn't support the d5 square. Later on they might put the knight to c5, but in the long run that's not really the right square for the knight. So really what I'm going to suggest to you, and this is by the way also where Karpov would win some of these games, because white gets a little bit more time to develop his pieces and get his knight back into play. Anyway, what I'm going to suggest is the move knight e5, which is a novelty to my knowledge. And I think it's a very strong novelty because after bishop takes b6, which is really the only way to challenge this move, I mean if you go something like f3, knight d7, now we are playing a hedgehog again, but as I said it's more sort of on my terms because this queen doesn't make a whole lot of sense in the hedgehog setup. You would prefer to have it on d2, so this is just a very comfortable version for black. I show a little bit more in the ebook about this, but I think you should be really comfortable playing this, knowing that you have a good version of an opening which is already quite solid in itself. Bishop takes b6 is of course the critical test, but after queen d7 the white now has to face the problem of defending the e-pawn. The most logical move would be f3, since after queen c2, queen c6 there's a double attack and black regains the pawn with a better position. F3 would be the logical move, and after rook fb8 it appears that white is actually in a little bit of trouble. So he would have to make some strange maneuvers here in order to keep his pawn. As you can see, if you remove the queen now to c2 or d1, black can simply take on e4 and once again he will end up with a slightly better position. So knight d1 is the move that the computer suggests here, but even though it looks like maybe white is ready to do something like queen e3 and get out of that pin, black now has to move queen c8. I believe the reason for queen c8 is that you want to play the move knight d7 in order to force the bishop to leave and then take on e4. Now queen e3, as I said, looks like it solves the problem for white, but now he falls victim to a very thematic breakthrough which happens after knight d7, bishop a5 and d5, and black actually is enjoying a very nice initiative here. One sample line I would show is b4, stopping this bishop c5 threat, and after d takes e4, f4, I like the move knight c5, which is quite fancy. White can take on c5 because then bishop takes would come and win the queen. And at the same time this bishop is really out of play, so I have the feeling black can afford to play the knight to d3, actually sacrifice a pawn, but in order, I mean afterwards you would get to play something like queen c6, attacking on g2, the white squares will be weakened, some moves like queen a4 could be very annoying, get the rooks back into play, maybe rook c8, rook b8. And I just have the feeling that this is a very hard position for white to play, and especially if your opponent isn't prepared for this, this is going to be something that you can really catch him in. So this is actually, I think, quite a nice piece of preparation. So I hope you like my solution and my explanation for the knight b5 lines. In the coming videos we're going to be discussing the bishop e3, queen f3 system, which some of you might be waiting for. That's a very topical line, and still a few sidelines on move 6 that I just want to briefly go through. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next videos.